There is a slightly crumpled, aggressively colored picture of a blue dog currently taped to my refrigerator. My 4-year-old thrust it into my face yesterday while I was in the middle of a high-stakes Zoom conference call. Without even looking away from my webcam, I reflexively smiled, nodded, and mouthed the words, "Wow, good job, buddy." It was automatic. It was efficient. And according to the latest behavioral neuroscience, it was entirely the wrong move. As a working mom who is constantly balancing corporate deadlines with toddler meltdowns, I understand the biological pull of the quick praise shortcut. We are tired, we want our kids to feel loved, and good job is the easiest tool in the box. But I spent weeks digging through the 2026 child development data so you do not have to, and the science reveals a hidden cost. Today, we are exploring the Overjustification Effect through a clear roadmap. We will walk through 3 distinct paths. Path 1 is the praise default. Path 2 is the Radical Praise Detox. And Path 3 is the process praise middle ground. Before we walk down those 3 paths, we have to look at the baseline research regarding human motivation. The core of this exploration rests on something psychologists call the Overjustification Effect. It stems from a landmark study where researchers observed children who intrinsically loved drawing with magic markers. The researchers divided the children and started offering one group a shiny certificate every time they drew a picture. At first, production skyrocketed. The kids drew frantically to get the certificates. But when the researchers eventually removed the reward, something fascinating and deeply concerning happened. The children who had been rewarded completely stopped drawing. They lost all interest in the magic markers. The external reward had entirely consumed their internal motivation. By overjustifying the activity with a prize, the adults accidentally taught the children that drawing was a chore to be compensated for, rather than a joy to be experienced. This is the scientific backdrop against which all modern parenting praise must be evaluated. The stakes here extend far beyond crayons and magic markers. We are currently raising a generation of children facing unprecedented levels of performance anxiety and external validation seeking. As parents, we often wonder why our older children suddenly lose their curiosity, why they refuse to try things they might fail at, or why they seem totally dependent on our applause just to get their shoes on in the morning. The data suggests that the foundation for this burnout is laid in our living rooms during the toddler and preschool years. When we constantly narrate and evaluate their play, we are unintentionally writing the script for their inner monologue. We are teaching them whether their worth is tied to their output or whether their value exists independently of our applause. Understanding this dynamic is not about adding more parental guilt to our already overflowing plates. It is about finding a sustainable, research-backed way to foster genuine, lifelong independence. We begin with the first of our 3 paths, the praise default. This is the philosophy of constant, outcome-based positive reinforcement. To understand why we naturally gravitate to this, we have to look back at mid-century behaviorism. Psychologists like B.F. Skinner built the foundation of modern behavioral psychology on a very simple premise. Behavior that is rewarded is repeated. In our homes, this translates to an endless loop of verbal treats. We say, "Good job," when they eat a single pea. We say, "Good job," when they successfully put their left shoe on their left foot. We say, "Good job," when they simply exist quietly in the backseat of the car for more than 4 minutes. As a working parent, I completely understand the biological and psychological pull of this path. When you have been managing workplace crises, answering rapid-fire emails, and navigating traffic, your brain is depleted. You do not have the cognitive bandwidth to offer a nuanced, sociological breakdown of your toddler's block tower. You want a shortcut to domestic harmony. Behaviorism provides that shortcut. The verbal reward of "good job" triggers a tiny hit of dopamine in the child's brain. It feels good to them, and seeing them smile feels profoundly good to us. We are hardwired to want to please our children and to seek out that reciprocal warmth. Furthermore, we are largely the product of the self-esteem movement of the late 80s and 90s. We were raised on a steady diet of gold stars, participation trophies, and constant validation. It is our native language, and we speak it effortlessly because it requires almost zero active processing. Let us picture the reality of the praise default on a random Tuesday evening. You have just walked through the door. You are holding a laptop bag, a half-eaten granola bar, and the physical weight of a long workday. In the living room, your 4-year-old has managed to line up their toy cars in a perfectly straight, color-coded row. Before your coat is even off, you hear yourself say, "Wow, good job, buddy." A few minutes later, you are at the dinner table. You are desperately trying to get some protein into this tiny human. They pick up a single piece of chicken. "Good job eating your dinner," you chirp, your voice artificially high. Later, it is bath time. They manage to keep the water mostly inside the tub. "Good job splashing gently." It is a constant, exhausting narration. We become eager sports commentators for the absolute most mundane activities of daily life. And here is where I want to pause for a brief moment. If you are finding this kind of research-backed exploration helpful, I invite you to join our community of inquiry-driven parents by subscribing to the channel. I build these deep dives because busy parents deserve access to the data without having to read the dense academic journals themselves, and your support tells me this research is actually serving you in the trenches. Returning to our Tuesday evening, the reality of this default path is that it requires the parent to be the eternal judge of the child's environment. We are constantly evaluating, constantly reacting, and filling the silence of the house with our voices, leaving very little room for the child to simply experience their own environment. The trade-off of this constant verbal validation is steep, and it brings us right back to the overjustification effect we looked at earlier. The research is incredibly clear on this. When we attach an external reward to an activity that a child already enjoys intrinsically, we actively destroy their natural internal motivation. We take play and we accidentally turn it into work. The real-world analogy I use for this is eating heavily processed junk food when you are desperately hungry. A handful of candy will absolutely spike your blood sugar and solve the immediate sensation of hunger. It works in the short term, but the inevitable crash leaves you more depleted than before, and it provides zero actual nourishment for your body to grow. Constant good jobs are the junk food of psychological motivation. By constantly evaluating our children's output, we subtly shift their focus away from the joy of the activity itself and toward our reaction to it. They stop drawing the dog because it feels wonderful to drag a blue crayon across paper, and they start drawing the dog solely to get the dopamine hit of your applause. The hidden cost here is paid by the child's future self. We inadvertently create praise junkies. These are children who, as they grow into teenagers and young adults, do not know how to evaluate their own worth or their own work without looking over their shoulder for an authority figure to tell them they did it right. We sacrifice their long-term psychological independence for our short-term desire to see them smile and comply. It is a trade-off that compounds dangerously over time. Despite the heavy developmental costs of the overjustification effect, there are specific moments and specific temperaments where the praise default actually shines, and we need to be completely honest about that in our homes. This path is the absolute best fit when you need immediate, short-term safety compliance. If your toddler stops at the edge of a busy street without running into traffic, that is not the moment for a nuanced, Socratic dialogue about their intrinsic desire to preserve their physical form. That is the moment for a loud, enthusiastic, behaviorist, "Good job stopping!" Extrinsic verbal rewards are incredibly effective for establishing baseline safety habits in very young, impulsive children. Furthermore, this path can be momentarily useful for children with highly anxious temperaments who are entering a completely new, terrifying environment. If a highly sensitive child is stepping into a loud, chaotic preschool classroom for the first time, a quick hit of evaluative praise can serve as a temporary emotional life raft. It provides a familiar, predictable anchor in a sea of unknown variables. The key is recognizing that this is a temporary tool, not a permanent developmental strategy. It is the emergency brake, not the steering wheel. We use it deliberately when the environment demands immediate compliance, but we actively put it away once the crisis has passed. I can hear the objection forming right now. If you are sitting there looking at a mountain of mismatched socks, drinking coffee that went cold 3 hours ago thinking, I just want my kid to put their shoes on without a 45-minute negotiation, I do not care about their intrinsic neuroscience, I am right there with you. It is incredibly easy to critique behaviorism in a sterile academic laboratory. It is entirely different when you are trying to get out the door at 7:15 a.m. and your toddler has suddenly gone boneless on the hallway rug. The goal here is not an unreachable standard of perfection. We are simply exploring the data so we can make conscious choices, rather than relying entirely on unconscious reflexes. Taking a breath and resetting our expectations is part of the work. This brings us to Path 2, the Radical Praise Detox. This philosophy, heavily championed by Alfie Kohn, Montessori educators, and RIE practitioners, swings the pendulum in the complete opposite direction. The core belief here is that children deserve to experience their own achievements without adult interference, and that almost all evaluative praise is inherently manipulative. The research backing this path highlights that a child's brain is naturally hardwired for intense, intrinsic curiosity. They do not need us to motivate them to learn. They just need us to get out of the way. To understand the science here, consider behavioral economist Dan Ariely's concept of market norms versus social norms. Imagine you go to your mother-in-law's house for a beautiful Thanksgiving dinner. She has spent days preparing the meal. At the end of the night, you pull out your wallet and say, "That was a genuinely good job. Here is $50. It would completely destroy the warmth of the evening. You took a social, intrinsically motivated act of love and applied a cold market evaluation to it. The neuroscience suggests we do the exact same thing to our children's play when we constantly slap a verbal evaluation onto it. The radical detox philosophy demands that we remove the good jobs entirely and replace them with neutral observation. Instead of judging the work, we simply state what we see. We become mirrors rather than judges. We strip away the market norms of parental approval and allow the child to marinate in the pure social and developmental joy of their own unbothered exploration. It is a mathematically beautiful theory of human development. The reality of applying the radical praise detox in a modern household, however, is deeply, profoundly awkward. Let us go back to our living room on a Tuesday afternoon. Your child spends 20 minutes painstakingly constructing a towering, precarious structure out of magnetic tiles. They are beaming with pride. They look at you, their eyes shining, waiting for the customary applause. Under the radical detox path, you deliberately swallow your instinct to cheer. Instead, you look at the tower, you look at them, and you offer a neutral observation. You say in a calm, measured voice, "You used 4 blue blocks and 3 red blocks. You built it very high." The silence that follows is usually palpable. Your child might look confused. They might push the tower slightly closer to you, prompting you for the dopamine hit they are accustomed to. As a parent, this reality requires immense, almost painful self-control. You are actively fighting against your own neurological conditioning. You have to monitor every single word that comes out of your mouth to ensure it contains no trace of judgment, positive or negative. You find yourself narrating their actions like a detached documentary filmmaker. You are putting the puzzle piece in the slot. You are eating the carrot. You drew a circle. In practice, the living room transforms from a loud arena of cheerleading into a quiet, somewhat clinical space of observation. It takes incredible mental stamina to sustain this tone, especially when every other adult in the child's life is still heavily utilizing the praise default. The trade-off of the Radical Praise Detox is heavily weighted toward parental emotional suppression. While we absolutely gain the benefit of protecting the child's intrinsic motivation, the cost is that we often end up sounding like cold, emotionless robots. Human beings are deeply social creatures, and genuine spontaneous joy is a massive part of a healthy parent-child attachment. When a parent is so terrified of accidentally triggering the overjustification effect that they suppress their own natural delight, the home environment can feel strangely sterile. The child is protected from being a praise junkie, yes, but they also might feel fundamentally uncelebrated. There is a very real emotional cost to stripping away all evaluative warmth. When they finally ride their bicycle without training wheels for the very first time, offering a detached, "You balanced on 2 wheels?" often feels inadequate to the sheer emotional gravity of the moment. We sacrifice shared, euphoric celebration on the altar of developmental purity. Furthermore, this path asks the parent to do a massive amount of cognitive editing in real time. We are already dealing with decision fatigue from our careers, from meal planning, and from household logistics. Adding a rigid filter over our natural speech patterns can lead to increased parental burnout. We might start avoiding commenting on their play altogether simply because it requires too much mental energy to formulate the perfectly neutral, non-evaluative sentence. In avoiding the trap of manipulating our children with praise, we risk accidentally withdrawing our emotional presence entirely. Despite the robotic awkwardness, the Radical Praise Detox shines brilliantly in very specific circumstances, particularly during deep play states. If you observe your child completely lost in an activity, whether they are silently digging a hole in the dirt, intensely examining a bug, or quietly painting, this is the exact moment to deploy the detox. When they are in a state of flow, completely unbothered by the adult world, the absolute best thing a parent can do is nothing. If they do look up for validation, offering a neutral, "You are digging a very deep hole," acknowledges their existence without dragging them out of their flow state to process your emotional evaluation. This path is also incredibly effective for fiercely independent, autonomous toddlers. Children with naturally stubborn, self-directed temperaments often bristle at being overly praised, as they intuitively sense the subtle manipulation behind it. For these kids, neutral observation feels profoundly respectful. It honors their autonomy and allows them to take complete ownership of their own milestones. It is a powerful tool to use during quiet, focused, independent time, serving as a palate cleanser for the brain, resetting their dopamine baselines and allowing their natural curiosity to lead the way without the interference of adult agendas. This sounds nearly impossible when you are exhausted. I want to acknowledge the massive elephant in the room. The visual, tangible extensions of praise. We are living in the era of the modern tablet timer, the intricate potty training sticker charts, and the digital reward points for doing chores. The entire ecosystem of modern childhood is built on extrinsic motivation. It is highly seductive because, honestly, the sticker chart works for the first 3 days. It gives us a moment of peace. If you are sitting there realizing your home is currently running on a complex economy of gummy bears and enthusiastic thumbs ups, please drop the guilt. We rely on these tools because the modern village is broken and we are operating at maximum capacity. The goal is simply to peek behind the curtain of these systems so we know how to slowly dismantle them. This leads us to our final option, Path 3, the process praise middle ground. Pioneered by Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck and her extensive research on the growth mindset, this path seeks a sustainable compromise between constant evaluation and robotic neutrality. The philosophy here asserts that it is not praise itself that is toxic, but rather the type of praise. The research shows a massive neurological difference between praising a fixed trait like, "You are so smart," or "You are a good boy," and praising the process, the effort, and the strategy. When we praise fixed traits, children become terrified of losing that label, leading them to avoid difficult challenges where they might fail. But when we praise the process, we teach them that their brain is a muscle that grows through struggle. The real-world analogy for this path is the expert sports commentator. A great color commentator does not just sit in the booth screaming, "Good job," every time a goal is scored, nor do they sit in total silence. Instead, they break down the strategy. They say, "Look at how she planted her left foot, kept her eye on the ball, and powered through the defense." They highlight the specific effort that led to the outcome. Process praise requires the parent to do exactly this. We still get to be warm, we still get to be enthusiastic, but we shift our vocabulary from praising the noun, the smart kid, the good drawing, to praising the verb, the hard work, the creative strategy, the resilience. We validate the journey rather than just stamping a grade on the final destination. Let us look at the reality of this middle ground in our living room. It is a Tuesday night, and your 7-year-old is struggling with a frustrating math worksheet. They have erased the same problem so many times, there is a hole in the paper. Finally, they get the correct answer and look up at you, exhausted but proud. The praise default would have you yell, "You are so smart, great job." The radical detox would have you state, "You wrote the number 4. But path 3 looks different. You sit down next to them, point to the messy erased paper and say, "I watched you struggle with that for 10 minutes. You got so frustrated, but you tried 3 different ways to solve it, and you did not give up. That took a lot of grit." You are still offering validation, but it is highly specific. Later, when your toddler cleans up their blocks, instead of, "Good boy," you say, "I saw how you put every single blue block in the bin all by yourself. That was really helpful to the family." In reality, this requires the parent to be deeply observant. You cannot just throw a generic "good job" over your shoulder while typing an email. You actually have to pay attention to the specific mechanics of what your child just accomplished. The tone in the home remains warm and celebratory, but the conversations become slightly longer, highly detailed, and deeply focused on the mechanics of problem solving rather than just the final, polished outcome of the activity. The major trade-off of the process praise middle ground is the massive cognitive load it places on the parent. While the child benefits from a resilient growth mindset, the parent pays for it in mental energy. It takes significant thought to formulate specific, process-oriented praise on the fly. You cannot use this path on autopilot. When you are deeply fatigued, trying to find the exact right words to praise the specific geometric strategy your child used to build a Lego bridge feels like trying to speak a second language while half asleep. The hidden cost here is that it demands absolute, undivided parental presence. You actually have to watch the struggle happen in order to praise the strategy used to overcome it. In a dual-income household where time and attention are intensely fractured, Maintaining this level of specific observation is incredibly taxing. Parents often find themselves slipping back into the good job default simply because they literally did not see the process. They only looked up from their laptop in time to see the finished product. There is also the risk of over-explaining. In our desperation to do it right, we can end up delivering a lengthy, exhausting TED Talk on resilience to a toddler who just successfully put a lid on a Tupperware container. The effort to perfectly articulate the growth mindset can sometimes drown out the simple, organic joy of a shared moment, replacing natural connection with what feels like a highly engineered psychological intervention. The process praise middle ground shines brightest when dealing with school-age children and specific temperaments that lean toward perfectionism. If you have a child who falls apart at the first sign of failure, who refuses to draw because it doesn't look perfect, or who is deeply anxious about academic performance, this is the exact path to utilize heavily. By obsessively praising their grit, their willingness to try, and their recovery from mistakes, we slowly dismantle their fear of failure. It is the absolute best fit for moments of active skill acquisition, learning to read, learning to ride a bike, or tackling complex social conflicts. It gives them a concrete vocabulary for their own resilience. When they inevitably fail at a task at school, they will not hear, "You are not smart enough," in their head. They will hear your voice saying, "You just haven't found the right strategy yet." While it requires too much parental bandwidth to use for every tiny daily task, reserving this path for moments of genuine struggle and accomplishment provides the child with the psychological armor they need to navigate the increasing demands of the outside world, creating a robust internal foundation that is not easily shattered by an unexpected bad grade or a lost soccer game. We cannot talk about the volume of praise in our homes without looking at the underlying maternal and paternal guilt that often drives it. As working parents, we are away from our children for 40, 50, or 60 hours a week. When we finally reunite in the evening, there is an intense, subconscious drive to make up for lost time. We overcompensate by drowning them in positive reinforcement. We want to pack a full day's worth of love, validation, and connection into the 2 chaotic hours between daycare pickup and bedtime. This guilt acts as an accelerant for the good job myth. We use praise as a quick, efficient vehicle for delivering affection when we are low on time. Recognizing this dynamic is powerful. It allows us to separate our own need to feel like a good parent from the child's actual developmental need for space, quiet observation, and intrinsic play. The complexity of praise multiplies exponentially when we add siblings into the mix. In my home, the moment I offer a highly specific, enthusiastic piece of process praise to one child, the other child instantly drops what they are doing and begins clamoring for their own evaluation. Praise, even well-intentioned process praise, naturally sets up an economy of scarcity in the living room. It acts as a spotlight. When we shine it on one child, the sibling immediately feels cast in the shadows. This is where blending our paths becomes crucial. We often see parents inadvertently crushing one child's intrinsic joy by publicly evaluating the sibling's identical activity. To navigate this, the data suggests shifting heavily toward the radical detox, neutral observation, when managing shared sibling play. Reserving our process praise for one-on-one moments prevents the home from turning into an intense, competitive arena where siblings are constantly performing to win the finite resource of parental applause, allowing them to play together without keeping a psychological scorecard. If you are listening to this and feeling a wave of panic because you have literally said "good job" 47 times since breakfast, please take a deep breath. You have not broken your child. Human psychology is incredibly resilient, and a child's neurological development is shaped by broad, long-term patterns. not by individual Tuesday mornings where you just needed them to put their boots on. The research is meant to be a compass, guiding us toward better long-term habits, not a weapon to beat ourselves up with when we inevitably fall short. No parent can maintain perfectly crafted process praise or Zen-like neutral observation all the time. We are aiming for a slow, gradual shift in our family's conversational diet, swapping out some of the motivational junk food for more sustainable psychological nutrition when we have the energy to do so. The reality of modern parenting is that purism is a trap. We do not have to pick just one of these three paths and rigidly adhere to it until our kids leave for college. Instead, we can build what I call a praise portfolio. We use the praise default strategically for immediate safety compliance or moments of high environmental anxiety. We use the radical detox, neutral observation, during their deep, independent play to protect their flow states and save our own vocal cords. And we lean into the process praise middle ground when they are actively struggling to learn a new skill and need a vocabulary of resilience. By mixing these approaches based on the child's temperament, the specific situation, and critically, our own fluctuating parental energy levels, we create a balanced psychological ecosystem. We give them the safety of our validation when they are panicked, the respect of our silence when they are focused, and the map of a growth mindset when they are discouraged. It is flexible, sustainable, and highly realistic. To summarize the trade-offs, Path 1, the praise default, buys us short-term harmony and compliance, but risks creating long-term praise junkies dependent on external validation. Path 2, the radical detox, beautifully preserves a child's intrinsic motivation and autonomy, but asks the parent to suppress natural joy, often making the home feel emotionally sterile. Path 3, the process middle ground, perfectly builds the resilience of a growth mindset, but requires massive, exhausting cognitive load and observation from the parent. There is no magic bullet here, no singular method that removes the friction of raising human beings. Every choice requires a sacrifice. The empowerment comes from knowing exactly what we are trading away in any given moment, rather than sleepwalking through our interactions on autopilot. We become active participants in shaping our children's internal dialogue, choosing our words with intention rather than just reflex. As we wrap up this exploration, I want to turn the lens back to your own living room. Parenting is a series of shifting seasons, and what works today might completely break down tomorrow. Which of these three paths fits the specific season of parenting you are in right now? Are you heavily reliant on the praise default just to survive the toddler years? Are you experimenting with the awkward silence of the radical detox? Or are you actively trying to build the vocabulary for the process middle ground? Drop your current reality in the comments below. Sharing our messy, imperfect strategies helps us all feel a little less isolated in the trenches. Until next time, keep observing, keep adapting, and keep exploring.